This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Talking about race can be uncomfortable, but one Connecticut town is not letting discomfort quash discourse. Today we hear from a Southington group about the community conversations it's organized in recent months. Just last week, Southington Women for Progress held a discussion on race. It's part of a series the group started, and coincidentally it was scheduled before a troubling video by a Southington student was posted on social media. Now, are similar conversations happening in your town, your city? You can join us too. The number 860-275-7266. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Now, for more about the community conversations happening in Southington, I'm happy to welcome into our studio Erica Roggeveen Byrne. She's the founder of the Southington Women for Progress. Erica, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about this group. I understand it's nonpartisan. So tell me what prompted you and other women to get together to form this community group.
So I founded Southington Women for Progress about 2 years ago, and the intent was really to create a space where women who share values could come together and have an opportunity to make a difference in the community.
There's lots of ways to get involved in the community. And so in terms of the women that have come forward, what are some of the issues or areas in your community that they hope to make an impact?
Well, one of the things that we started out doing was just taking a look and seeing what other groups were working in the community. And so we have done like hygiene product drives for some local organizations. We sponsor a food shelf at Southington Community Services. But a lot of the people in the group are parents. And so education quickly became one of the topics that we wanted to focus on. You know, as a white parent of white children, I was able to see things that were missing in my kids' experience. We also have a number of women of color in the group, and so the experience that their children were having in the school system really showed that there were areas for improvement.
Tell us more about the community of Southington. I used to live in Middletown for years, so I'm familiar with Southington. Well, we know we have many towns and cities in the state of Connecticut. For listeners who aren't familiar with Southington, tell us about, who are your residents?
So Southington is about 92% white, using the census definitions. And so it is a very, traditionally white town. A lot of residents either have lived there for generations or moved from surrounding communities, so from New Britain, from Meriden. And it's, by and large, it's a pretty kind of conservative, traditional community. And so one of the impetuses behind starting the group was to be able to bring women specifically together so that we had a space to share our concerns and our issues and try to make a difference.
I was curious about the demographics because, as you described, that actually describes a lot of Connecticut if you're not taking in our cities.
It does.
And when we think about how to encourage residents to get involved or even to come to a conversation where you're talking about race, how do you get people engaged, Erica?
So it's interesting. This last conversation was our third in a series of community conversations. And the last two, a lot of the people who came were members of our group. We also reach out to town council members and Board of Education members to invite them. And we have been pleasantly surprised with their response to that and their willingness to come out and have these conversations. We were expecting a similar response to this past conversation when we planned it in November. And then the video happened. And
tell us more about that video.
Well, it was a Snapchat video that was done by a student at Southington High School. And in that video, he expressed some extremely disturbing views about Black students and Black people in particular. And so we have been trying to have these conversations for the past almost 2 years, but that video really served as a catalyst to really have these conversations at a deeper and broader level. And one thing that was able to happen was at the school board meeting on January 10th, there were students at Southington High School who came to the board meeting, and these are students of color, mostly Black students, and shared their stories. And it was Before that, a lot of the administration response had been, this is a one-off incident. It's not representative of our town or of our community. And that had kind of been the way that the administration had been navigating previous incidents as well, that it was just, it wasn't representative. And I think hearing the student voices and hearing, these were high school students, share how they felt, physically and emotionally unsafe at school and minimized by teachers and administrators, I think has really had a big impact, particularly on the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. And they've been now willing to say that there needs to be a more systemic look at addressing racism in the schools.
This is Where We Live. In studio with me, Roggeveen Byrne, founder of Southington Women for Progress, a nonpartisan community group based in Southington, Connecticut. We invited Erica onto the show to talk about the series of conversations this group has facilitated, talking about topics that aren't always easy to navigate, including when you think about your last community meeting, Erica, where you're talking about color blindness. So you were just talking about students at a Board of Ed meeting on January 10th. This particular meeting I'm referencing just happened, I guess, just a couple of weeks ago or last week. Yeah. But tell us, when you mentioned this video that happened and it might have galvanized some more interest, and maybe this is something that more residents should be talking about. What did town leaders, what did residents say that were not part of your group but who felt that they wanted to engage as well?
I think people were, they were shocked and they were surprised that this kind of video would be produced by someone, particularly, a teenage student. And it really, I think, had the benefit of opening people's eyes to the issues of racism in the community.
This is Where We Live, and you can join our conversation. Here's the number, 860-275-7266. Because you, Erica, you've mentioned school officials, I wanted to bring into the conversation now the Southington Superintendent, Tim Connellan, who's joining us by phone. Tim, welcome to our show.
Good morning. Thank you.
So tell us more about your reaction when you heard the students and some of the concerns they raised at that Board of Ed meeting, and then also this community meeting last week, again, talking about race and how maybe some of the residents feel minimized and their concerns have not been taken into account in the past.
Well, first of all, the information that the students shared at the Board of Education meeting, I think was very emotional, or it precipitated a pretty emotional response among the board members and the administrators. I also sent a communication out to our staff members, and I asked if they would take a few minutes and view at least that portion of the video from the Board of Education meeting. And the responses that I received from staff members were similar to what Erica just mentioned. People were surprised. They were shocked, quite frankly, and wanting to know what they could do. And our overall response, initially I was like, I have absolutely no tolerance for any of our students to be treated like that. We really don't. So it was eye-opening to have that many students come forward, and we're talking about 10 students or so, but if that's representative of our student population, that's a pretty disturbing statistic, shall we say. So it was something that I think allowed us to rethink or take another look at how we're approaching some of the things we do. Now, for example, we have wonderful things that are happening in all of our schools that help students to learn how to give, how to be sensitive and accepting of others. And that happens all the time. It happens every year. Maybe it's not enough to do it that way. Maybe it needs to be a little bit more focused. So I think it does prompt some introspection and a look at how we're actually doing some of the things that we're doing.
Tim, I understand that you are forming a council to maybe meet regularly to talk about these issues that the students and other community members have raised. Tell us about who will be part of this group and where do you go from here?
Sure, thank you. We sat down afterwards, Mr. Medancy and myself especially, and invited the high school principal, Mr. Straneri, to come in, and our Director of People Personnel Services, Meg Walsh, to begin to brainstorm some ideas on how we could go about having a broader discussion, because it's not just about the color of someone's skin. It's about religion. It's about acceptance of diversity, etc. So we brainstormed, really, were some ideas on who might be valuable contributors to this type of an effort. We wanted to model it along the same lines as a group that we put together for school security and safety. Now, the School Security and Safety Committee, it's an interagency committee, and we have leadership from the police department, from the fire department, emergency management services, and the school. These are groups that typically work in parallel with one another, but not always necessarily together, except in certain instances. So our idea was to put a group together, put it on the calendar, meet on a regular basis, and then that's how you begin to build relationships and the ability to work together, and that allows the free flow of ideas, if you will. And that has evolved just in that fashion. So we were thinking along the same lines for a different purpose, but necessarily the process would be about the same. So we started identifying staff members who we have, and we're not an overly diverse community, and we're not an overly diverse staff, so we tried to identify staff members who represented some diversity for us, but we also wanted folks who we knew would be familiar with both curriculum and social and emotional well-being of students. Then we began to look at some of our partners. CREC has been a really great partner for us in the Open Choice program, so we reached out to CREC for someone from that organization to participate. We reached out to the State Education Resource Center and asked someone to participate from there. We also have someone who not only works for the Special Education Resource Center, but is a Southington resident. So we thought that was a sort of a bonus, if you will. And then we're reaching out to a couple of other agencies in town. We have Youth Services, which is a branch under the town government side, but yet they work with our students and have done some particularly good work with our minority student union at the high school. So we thought that was appropriate. We wanted to also have a heavy representation of students, and the interesting thing with that is we're trying to represent the diversity that we have across racial, ethnic, religious lines. We've had students speak up who represent themselves as either gay or lesbian or transgender. So we're trying to represent all of our groups of students without letting this larger coalition get too big, because then it becomes unmanageable.
Yeah. Tim, it sounds really good that there's so much work to reach across on many different stakeholders to get them on board. But then, this is also, I guess, it's hard to focus in on a particular area that you hope to change so that it improves, I guess, overall school climate. So I'm just curious, despite getting all of the right people at the table, what do you hope to focus on first?
What we hope to focus on first, quite frankly, is really just opening the dialogue and asking folks what they think is necessary for improvement. But then we also looked at really 4 areas or 4 components of this group. I'm not sure that we've done the greatest job in getting information out about what we do and what we are as a community. So I think out of this we're going to have some folks who are willing to work on some of the data to be able to get that out, communicate out to the community at large what we really look like as a community. I do believe that we have to have another group or another subgroup from this larger group look at curriculum. And for example, do we engage? We have a very, very, very sound curriculum development process and curriculum writing process, something that we didn't have here 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Steve Medancy, our assistant superintendent, has worked really, really, really hard on that. But do we do we do curriculum audits? Do we look at materials that we're purchasing, to look and see if those materials are representative of our broader group of students. And then I think we also need to have another group there that's willing to help with the communication aspect of that and set up some broader conversations and communicate out to those who are interested, what's happening, and to be able to bring input back in, to this group as well.
I wanted to ask Erica Roggeveen Byrne to chime in again, founder of Southington Women for Progress. We're hearing from Superintendent Tim Connellan talking about this need to bring people from many different backgrounds together in Southington to help address some of the issues that have been raised at these community meetings. I mean, what is your response?
I think that it's wonderful that to see the sea change kind of in the response from the superintendent and the assistant superintendent in the past several weeks has just been, I'm very hopeful about it. I think there was, as I said, the students speaking really was a very impactful moment for everyone. And so to see this work being put in motion, looking at the curriculum, looking at how Eurocentric the curriculum currently is, and seeing what can be done to change that, and taking a look at the overall climate, I think it's hopeful.
What about efforts to increase the number of minority teachers that are within your public schools, Erica? Is that something that students would respond well to if they feel they have teachers in front of them that understand their background? And we know we're going to be talking about that coming up later here on Where We Live, about the minority teacher gap in the state of Connecticut, how it's not keeping up pace with the number of minority students in public schools.
Yeah, I think we know from the research that it is important for kids of color to have teachers who look like them and who can relate to them. But I also know that, as you said, Connecticut has its own issues just generally around recruiting teachers of color. And so one thing that I have spoken with the assistant superintendent about is, maybe it's not a goal that could be met to drastically increase the number of teachers of color in the district. But one thing that could happen would be to have a goal to make the district a place where teachers of color would want to apply and want to work.
You can join our conversation, 860-275-7266. Cheryl's calling. Cheryl, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Cheryl, and I'm a member of Southington Women for Progress. And I just heard what the superintendent said, and I think while that's a good step, I do think that it doesn't really make sense because they literally just admitted on the 11th of January that there may be a problem. So if you've been denying that there's a problem and treating it like it's a one-off, and then you look at the lack of diversity in the town and the municipality as a whole, as well as the school system, and then you're going to bring in those very same people to discuss a problem that they didn't feel that they had, how is that really going to be effective? Right, and I understand he's bringing in crack, but what about the community members who have been fighting this and asking for change for decades?
Well, let's have Superintendent Connellan respond to your point, Cheryl.
Well, the last part, which I didn't get to say, is that we're inviting parents in as part of this group, which is, I think, an integral component, and other community members. And we're seeking to have people, again, who represent diversity. So it's not the quote-unquote same group. And, Cheryl and I have disagreed on things before, and I disagree with Cheryl's assessment of this. But we're just going to have to agree to disagree.
Erica, again, moving forward, we think it's really important to shine a light on what's happening in Southington, because it is one of the first steps, right, to talk to get people from different backgrounds together to talk about issues, to hope to get to some type of resolution. We're feeling that all people in Southington feel comfortable wherever they are. I'm just curious about your thoughts on what Cheryl was saying, because not everyone is lockstep with this idea of moving forward in this particular way.
Right. I think it is important to make sure that as this group begins, that there are very specific ideas and plans in order to develop the racial consciousness of the people in the group. I mean, one great first step would be for everyone in the group, particularly the white folks in the group, to read the book Waking Up White by Debbie Irving, or a similar resource to really help the participants in the group who may not have seen this as an issue in the past to start to do some self-reflection on what it means to be a white person in Southington, in Connecticut, in our country, and to start to take those first steps so that as this group gathers and tries to include diverse voices, that it's doing so in a way that is equitable and isn't kind of reinforcing norms that may have been happening in the past.
I wanted to fit in another quick call before we have to end the segment. Tanita is calling, also a resident of Southington. Tanita, go ahead.
Hi, yes. I was saying that I grew up in Southington. I'm a black woman who was raised in Southington, and from when I was 5 years old, that's when I had my first racist experience. And it's continued on until this day. I'm raising a young black man. My son is 5 years old. He does not attend a Southington school because of the lack of diversity. Southington does have a great educational program, but diversity is a huge issue. And with the Southington Women for Progress, they have been doing wonderful things with these community forums. I'm very appreciative of them. There needs to be more done with the town council and with the Board of Education, because what the issue is that people in town feel there is no race issue, there is no racism, and that comes from the fact that they do have a privilege that me as a black person does not.
Well, thank you, Tanita, for your call. I did want to read a statement that we received from the Southington Town Council. This is from Chris Palmieri, I believe. I fully support the efforts of this group, Southington Women for Progress, and holding community conversations about ending all forms of racism. He goes on to say, Southington is a community that's inclusive of all of our residents. We're a community that consistently offers assistance for anyone in need, and our town council supports the equality of everyone and will not tolerate racism in any form. So I just also wanted to thank Superintendent Tim Connellan from calling in today to talk about the work that you're hoping to continue in the future. Maybe you can come back and let us know how it's progressing.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Connellan from the Southington Public Schools District. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Erica Roggeveen Byrne is going to continue to stay with us. She's founder of Southington Women for Progress. And coming up, we're going to hear from the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford, which helped facilitate this conversation in Southington last week. We're going to learn more about how the Stowe Center's programs to help communities tackle tough conversations that deal with social justice issues, like we've been talking about. Now, do you think your community could benefit from these types of community conversations? We want to hear from you, too. You can join us, 860-275-7266, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. What are productive ways to talk about a topic that can be uncomfortable for some? In Southington, Connecticut, a local community group recently hosted a conversation on race and racism. It was just one in a series of discussions being held in the town. Erica Roggeveen Byrne is with us. She's founder of Southington Women for Progress. And joining us now in studio is Oliver Scholes. He's program coordinator for the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford. Oliver, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Lucy. It's nice to be here.
And I should let our listeners know the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center is an underwriter on WNPR. But Oliver, tell me a little bit about the Stowe Center's involvement with the community of Southington. We talked a little bit about these conversations that have been happening. Coincidentally, there was a very racist video posted by a Southington teen recently that got community members talking about, what can be done to make sure that their community is more inclusive. What's your response to these series of conversations that are happening?
I mean, I think, first of all, it's having conversation is probably one of the most important things that we don't do when we talk about race or racism and other issues in American society. And the Stowe Center is really committed to, and has been committed for a long time now, to providing space and facility for having conversation. And our role in Southington has been to help people talk to one another, and that's how we came there in the first place last year, to recognize that people were interested in having conversations. Initially, around the statue of Christopher Columbus and now around other things too, and that you need someone to help you do that. We don't spend a lot of time learning how to talk to one another, and we do that professionally, and so we can help people do that as well.
When we talk about implicit bias and how many Americans in this country benefit from white privilege, that can be hard to hear. Also, in the conversations that have been happening over the last 2 years, when race or racism is brought up, people can get sensitive. People feel like they may be being labeled a racist if they say a particular thing. So how do you navigate that? I understand the media wasn't able to hear the residents during this community conversation, and one of the reasons you wanted people to be comfortable expressing their views. But I'm just curious, Oliver, how do you take an issue that can be uncomfortable and allow people to feel comfortable talking about it without feeling like they're going to be vilified for what comes out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's only so much you can do, and some of that is relying on people being willing to step outside. And when I say people, I mean white people here, to step outside of their comfort zones and hear people say, "I think what you said is racist," or "What you said was hurtful," and often, I think white people around conversations in race experience defensiveness, experience sensitivity, experience fragility, and I recognize all of those things. I'm a white man, and I have had those experiences. Right, I sort of speak of my own experience, and I think that's one of the reasons it is important to be a white person in that space. Right, in Southington, that it's a responsibility to be with other white folks and help them through those experiences. That's sort of kind of an ethical responsibility on some level. But I think it is about acknowledging, right? I mean, I understand that for some of the folks in Southington and around Connecticut, it may be the very first time they've had a conversation about race at all, and that is difficult. And I get that.
Erica, again, you're founder of this group, Southington Women for Progress. You're also a white woman. Has there been, have residents in the community who are not white questioned your group taking the lead on trying to address these disparities or concerns in Southington?
Well, one of the things that I set out to do from the beginning was to make sure that the group, to the extent possible, was an anti-racist space. So I'm happy that, we have a significant number of members of our group are women of color, mostly black women. It's a higher proportion than the population of Southington in general. And so, we set out very intentionally to make sure that, resources were being shared specifically about anti-racism, that there wasn't going to be tone policing happening of the women of color in the group, that there wasn't going to be minimizing of their experiences. And for me, the thing that has felt the best in terms of that is when women of color began to invite their own friends into the group. That really signaled to me that we are doing the work to create this space. But yes, definitely, as a white woman, I think I am constantly evaluating where my voice is most valuable to be heard and where it's most valuable for me to step back and help amplify the voices of others.
We're getting a tweet from Annika, I believe, who writes, necessary to a conversation about racism is a conversation about segregation. 13 miles from Waterbury, 18 miles from Hartford. Southington schools are less than 2% African American. That doesn't happen by accident. She's exactly right. We've talked about that many times. It's a constant topic of conversation about the fact that we have the way that Connecticut's set up. It's very segregated. And how do you get to some of the fundamental problems when you've got this system that allows it to happen? Yes,
and we're actually planning a community forum, which will be more like a panel conversation about that very topic, hopefully in May. So we're working with Erin Boggs at the Open Communities Alliance and also Cheryl, who called in, who is a realtor and who lives in Southington, to set up this panel so that we can open this conversation, because it is true a lot of the people who migrated into town between the 50s and now came from these surrounding, quote-unquote, urban areas. And there's a sense of well, I was able to make it out and to buy a house and to create a better life for my family, and why are people of color concentrated in these centers and they can't get out. And so to be able to open that conversation about how there's actual systemic structural reasons why that is the case, I think is very important for people to hear.
You're listening to Where We Live. Erica Roggeveen Byrne, founder of Southington Women for Progress, in studio with me. It's a nonpartisan group in Southington. And Oliver Scholes, program coordinator for the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford, Connecticut. You can join us too, 860-275-7266. Ethan's calling from Woodbridge. Ethan, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So talking about racism in school systems brought to mind an incident earlier this year in Woodbridge at Amity High School. I work with a large amount of Jewish teens in the area, and they had all commented on some pretty glaring issues of anti-Semitism among the student body. It started with egging Jewish families' houses among Bethany Orange and Woodbridge, and escalated to swastikas among, within the school. And unfortunately, I know the superintendent is no longer on the call, but I just wanted to start a bit of a discussion about what exact action is being taken towards these students specifically that are essentially committing these, for lack of a better word, hate crimes towards these other students. It's just upsetting when you have a culture in this country that is perpetuating this rise in behavior, and that you see these adults and people in these higher positions not taking stern action against these other children to really make sure and send a clear message that behavior isn't tolerated, and instead are effectually complicit in enforcing this behavior.
Well, thank you, Ethan, for the point that you raised. Oliver Scholes is with us from the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford. Unfortunately, we can't talk about how schools come up with policies or disciplinary policies to address when students are engaging in hate speech. But when you have these community or helping facilitate these community conversations, how do you address residents' concerns about whether it should be a zero tolerance when certain things are said, or is it a teachable moment? I mean, how do we navigate that?
I think the first thing is to recognize that these incidents don't happen in a vacuum, right? If students are engaging in racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic behavior, that's not something that is sort of springing fully formed from young people. And so it requires us to think about what else is going on in the community, and this speaks to the point that you and Erica were making a moment ago about the deliberateness of segregation, right? There's a reason that these communities are predominantly white. Connecticut was ground zero for anti-Semitism for a long time, right? And thinking about housing covenants, right, which were designed to keep Jewish people out of communities, designed to keep black people out of communities. So I think one of the things that is really difficult is there's a tendency when something happens in the schools to think about how we deal with students, how we deal with young people. And that's important. But it also requires us to reflect on what else is happening, what is happening with teachers, what is happening with administrators, and what is happening with parents elsewhere in the community, and to not let ourselves off the hook, so to speak, right?
Well, Erica, can I go back to you, because we talked about the conversation coincidentally being scheduled when you had I believe a Southington teen posting a very violent, the language that he was using, the racist language on social media. Obviously, the school district has a policy that they're handling with this particular student, but how does the town want this to be addressed? Are there questions about whether this will be a slap on the wrist or if this warrants expulsion?
I mean, I think the hard thing is that, understandably, student discipline is often kept very private on what happens because it's protecting the students' privacy, because they are minors in most cases. One thing that we did hear, though, from the students who spoke at that January 10th Board of Ed meeting is that they understood that student privacy was important, but that often that they felt that when they reported something had happened to them, they never had any idea if any follow-up was done or if there were any consequences for the students. So I think it is important to find that balance between respecting student privacy, but also making sure that the students who are impacted and the wider community understands what the consequences are for those actions.
We just have a couple of minutes left for communities, residents who may be hearing this conversation or thinking about this might be good for where I live. Oliver, what are some suggestions you would have for other communities in our state in terms of wanting to find a productive way to have a conversation like this?
Yeah, I think the first thing is thinking about buy-in, right? It doesn't do any good for me to come to a community and say, I think it's important for everyone here to talk about racism if nobody's there is interested in it. And so I think buy-in is the first thing. And then it's sort of thinking about what do we want and need out of this conversation right now. And in some cases, it's simply to have a dialogue, right? We want to have a series of these across the course of the year, and I think it's important to have someone who's from outside of your community to facilitate those things. I think that's really useful. And in some cases, it's more concrete. We want to enact certain policy steps. We want to get real into the weeds of this. So I think it's important to buy in, and then I think it's important to think about what you want right now in 2019 and 2020.
And Erica, before we go, what's the next conversation you have planned?
Our next conversation is on February 8th, and that's going to be on talking with children about race and racism.
Erica Roggeveen Byrne, again, founder of Southington Women for Progress, a nonpartisan group. Erica, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Also, Oliver Scholes, program coordinator for the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford, also an underwriter here on WNPR. Oliver, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Lucy.
This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we're actually going to get an update on efforts in Connecticut to increase the number of minority teachers in public schools. You can join us, too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up tomorrow, when you sit down to watch your favorite show, do you check the program schedule for a weekly listing, or do you turn on Netflix or Hulu and start binging? On the next Where We Live, we're going to take a look at what the rise of internet-based streaming services means for the television industry. You can join us, too. That's tomorrow. Now, shifting back to our conversation, the number of minority students is growing in Connecticut, but that doesn't mean these students see teachers in their schools that look like them. Research shows that having teachers from diverse backgrounds can help minority students. It's called the role model effect. We'll learn more about that in just a few minutes. But I want to welcome back to the show Jacqueline Rabe Thomas, reporter with the Connecticut Mirror and ProPublica State Reporting Project. Jackie, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to hear more about your reporting on how local school districts are trying to address the minority teacher gap, so to speak. It's not looking good?
Sure. So statewide, a decade ago, there were 12 white educators for every 100 white kids. Last year, that number increased to 17 white educators for every 100 white kids. So the number of white educators in the classroom is increasing. Meanwhile, for minority kids, it's much, much lower. 2 minority educators for every 100 minority kids. That number hasn't changed over the last decade. It's been pretty steady. Now, there have been some great efforts along the way to increase that number, but the issue is that there are many more minority students as our demographics shift both in Connecticut and across the U.S. to have more minority students. So we're just not keeping pace in Connecticut. So despite all these efforts that Connecticut has been doing, we're just like barely keeping our head above water with making sure we have enough people who are reflective of our population.
Before we hear about some state efforts to try to change this, I wanted to hear a little bit more about, why do proponents of increasing minority teachers in public schools, why does it make a difference? What does the research tell us?
So there's a lot of research, including most recently Joshua Hyman out of the University of Connecticut. He found that there's this what's called a role model effect, which essentially says, relationships matter. And so when you go to school and you see someone who looks like you, you're more likely to, have similar experiences, have similar, things that you can relate to a little bit more. And the relationships grow and those things matter. And you don't necessarily need someone to look like you to have that positive relationship, but it doesn't hurt. And it also helps sometimes as well for people having a hard time connecting in school.
And maybe those students will graduate and want to enter the teaching profession if they think it's something that they've seen a role model before in them that maybe they think the teaching profession is for them. That can't hurt.
Exactly. It raises some aspirations.
When you look at the number of school districts in the state of Connecticut, in your reporting, 23 school districts did not have a single minority educator on staff. Meanwhile, in urban districts, it's a little more fair, the balance?
So in urban districts where they're overwhelmingly minority students, they are higher rates. So they are things like 25, 26% in Hartford or New Haven. But there's still a huge disparity because, it's 80, 85% minorities. But places in like Ashford, where there's 16% minority kids, there's not a single minority educator. Cornwall, 23% minority educators. Eastford, 14%. So you have districts where there are, a sizable amount of minority kids where there's just not minority educators. There's 23 of those towns.
We have tape of Representative and longtime Waterbury educator Johanna Hayes speaking at the Chef versus O'Neill 30th anniversary celebration earlier this month. In the clip, Congresswoman Hayes is talking about her daughter, who's now a teacher in West Hartford, and about the importance of having more minority teachers in the suburbs.
When I was named National Teacher of the Year, people said to me, "Why don't you get Waterbury to hire your daughter? I'm sure you have some influence and some pull." And I said to them, because West Hartford needs her just as bad as Waterbury. Mm-hmm. And when we're having these conversations, this is what I need for you to understand. It's not just about black teachers teaching black students. We cannot, she works at Hall High School, and it's one of the schools that have kids who are bused from the Hartford community into West Hartford. We cannot have this message that you got a seat in the lottery, and now we're going to send you to a school where you're going to have a better education. And then kids get there, and what meets them on this other side is no one that looks like them. Right. Because the subtext of that conversation is to be good, to be better, to be adequate, to be sufficient, is not to look like you.
And that's, again, Congresswoman Johanna Hayes. So tell us more about the efforts the Department of Ed sees that there is a need to have more minority educators in the classroom. So what are some steps that the Department of Ed has proposed, that the legislature has backed?
So recently, the State Department of Education, seeing that there's this huge disparity, has approved new programs. The State Board of Education has approved new programs to open. The Relay, which Johanna Hayes is actually part of in Waterbury, has had 91 people complete last year to get teachers certified for high-need areas, and only 8% of those students that went through that program to be future teachers were white. So the overwhelming majority of that program is putting out teachers who are minorities. Those are coming from, para-educators who are already in the schools, already have those connections in the communities, and getting them across the finish line. And then in December, the State Board of Education approved Teach for America to have bilingual education teachers. So people who are already in the schools, people who have a 3.0 GPA in their bachelor's degree, who are highly qualified, just aren't certified in the right areas, or to get them across the finish line. So sort of clearing those barriers. And then as far as what the state legislature has done, the state legislature has made it easier for people to come from other states. So a few years ago, I remember this person who was a teacher in Puerto Rico testifying before the education committee and saying, "I just want to teach in Connecticut, but my certificate is not recognized here." The State Department of Education and the State Board of Education has changed that, courtesy of the legislature changing the law. They've also allowed more states to have reciprocal agreements so that the State Department of Ed can recognize those agreements if the State Department of Ed has determined that that state's requirements for becoming a teacher are sufficient. So have really given the authority to the State Department of Ed to do that. Also, on praxis exams, the test that requires, one of the many tests that are required for teachers to enter the classroom, they're allowed to retake that for free. So if you fail the first time, you don't have to keep paying the $70, $75 to hopefully repass it. So the State Department of Ed has also negotiated a free retake of that test. And then I could go on and on. There's there's many different things that have happened to sort of clear some of those barriers.
Jacqueline Rabe Thomas is in studio with me here on Where We Live, reporter with the Connecticut Mirror and ProPublica State Reporting Project, as we talk about efforts to increase the number of minority teachers in Connecticut public schools. You mentioned Relay. I understand Teach for America is also helping get more people into the classroom. But are there challenges with how they're preparing families, applicants? I mean, can you explain how these programs are different from, say, obviously going to UConn for their Master of Ed program?
So it's a much different than a traditional teacher preparation program. It's abbreviated typically, and it's not the typical pedagogy that you would expect in a teacher preparation program. So it has raised concerns that among some teachers unions and teachers specifically, that what these high need students need in some of the urban districts are high qualified teachers. We don't need to lower the bar to get minority teachers in there. We just need to increase the pipeline, make it easier for teachers to get in minority teachers to get in the classroom, do things like more scholarships so that it's easier to become a teacher, and more affordable, rather, to become a teacher. And there's, the State Department of Ed in 2017, they had a survey of many stakeholders, and in the teacher stakeholder group, one of the concerns that was highlighted is that there's racism at play in the hiring process, that a level of state oversight in the hiring process might be helpful in some districts to make sure that there's, really whoever's the most qualified is getting the job.
And how are school districts responding to that?
School districts are, I think each district is sort of going their own route on how to go about getting more minority teachers in their classroom. I wouldn't want to say that I know what every single school district in the state is doing, but I have, when you look at some districts, you see that their rate of minority teachers is really high, and so you can kind of see that maybe they've prioritized it.
I should mention Brookings published a paper about the research being done about minority educators in classrooms across the country, finding bachelor's degree completion gaps make it much harder to achieve a teaching force whose diversity mirrors that of the student population. So we were talking about Department of Ed and how the legislature is trying to address this problem, but we now have a new governor, Governor Ned Lamont. What is he saying, if anything, about this need to get more minority teachers in the public schools?
So during the campaign, one of his regular talking points was we really need to have a teaching force that's reflective of our population. And his solution was that we need to have scholarships for more people to make it more affordable to come into the working force, as well as, the teaching workforce has really been sort of broken down. That, it's not really, for many, it's not considered a highly regarded profession. And so you kind of need to bring that back, as well as provide some scholarships. With that in mind, the state has had scholarships for minority teachers. The legislature has regularly cut funding for that. Currently, there's a scholarship program in the state where people can get up to $20,000 over several years. As the state reduced money for it, the number of people receiving that scholarship over the last several years has decreased from 50 a year to 19. So that's a cost driver right there to actually make that come to fruition. But if someone prioritizes it, then it might happen.
Before we run out of time, we should mention just the idea of having more diversity in our classrooms in public schools. It's more than just having a teacher that looks like the student, but when we look at data of how discipline falls disproportionately harder when we look at minority students in public schools, I mean, that's something at play too, of how a same-race teacher would handle a particular incident, or even understand more of a background of the child that's struggling.
Exactly. So Connecticut has the 9th highest suspension rate in the country. We've done a lot of stuff to bring down that suspension rate. We still have the 9th highest suspension rate. We also have huge disparities in who is actually being suspended and expelled from school.
And that might be something that comes up again in this new legislative session, previous bill to give more authority to teachers of how they handle disruptive children in the classroom, vetoed by former Governor Denham Malloy. We'll have to see if that comes up again this session. But I want to thank Jacqueline Rabe Thomas again, reporter for the Connecticut Mirror and ProPublica State Reporting Project, for coming in. We're going to tweet out a link to her article. Just look at Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Thanks for listening.